You're checking out the Investor Shed podcast with Nick Beveridge and Jeremy Kitchen. They're on the path to financial freedom and they're taking their community with them. Stay tuned for the best free real estate investing advice on the internet.
Welcome back to the Investor Shed podcast. My name is Nick Beveridge, and I'm here with my beautiful co-host, Jeremy Dwellin Kitchen. How are you?
I love physical compliments. I don't know if you know that. You made me feel really nice and pretty inside, nice and warm. So thank you, Nick. How are you doing today?
Doing great. I mean, I feel like physically I'm better than you, but you're pretty damn delicious.
Thanks. You are the superior specimen around these parts, so I'm fine with being a beta male, and that's just how it goes.
Speaking of superior genetics, today on our show we have Zeona McIntyre. How did it go?
I think it went really great. Zeona's a really cool guest. She has a lot of really great information regarding the short and medium term rental space. I also love how she got started in real estate investing. Pretty cool story on not even having to own your own property and making money off it. It's really cool.
She was house hacking before there was house hacking, before she was even owning, which is really cool. So, what was the biggest thing you learned? Your biggest takeaway from this?
Biggest takeaway is just the ease of when what she's trying to do is she's trying to create an easy lifestyle, and I love that. Like, investing doesn't need to be hard, it doesn't need to be stressful. She's trying to make life less complicated, and I love that.
Yes, you guys are going to enjoy this one. So, grab your peanut butter, grab your spoons, and let's dive in. All right, welcome back to the Investor Shed podcast. We've got Jeremy Kitchen in the house. Good morning.
Top of the morning to you, lad. How are we doing today, Nick?
Doing awesome. Thank you. And our guest today, Zeona McIntyre, a.k.a. Z Money, in the house. How you doing?
I'm great. Yeah, I love it because Jeremy was just like, I just worked on pronunciation so much, and then you said it kind of funny, and he made a little
I did. I said it wrong.
I was like, man, we had one job here, and we're already messing up.
Zeona McIntyre. It's McIntyre, right?
Yeah, it is. I don't know. It just came out weird.
Zeona or Zeona?
Zeona.
Zeona. Okay, everybody. That's what you get for a free podcast. All right.
All right. Well, hey, real quick, just to kind of reel this back in, Zeona, thank you so much for joining us today. We definitely appreciate you taking the time. Why don't you go ahead and just start us off a little bit and tell us how you got started into real estate investing, and tell us a little bit about your journey so far, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it was really accidental. I got started using Airbnb in an arbitrage way. So Airbnb arbitrage is basically renting and subletting out a place. And so when I first heard about Airbnb, I was a college student. I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and I had a roommate who was moving out. And a friend of mine had been trying it out and telling me, oh my God, you have to try this. It's so great. And so I thought, well, I have this opportunity. I have a furnished room because it was all my furniture she was living with. And I have sheets and towels. I can just try it. And if I don't like it, I can just get another roommate. But I loved it. And so I was living for free in that apartment and then realized I needed to scale. And so I got another place and kind of lived between two places for a few years until I could own. And now, that was 10 years ago, 11 years ago. It was a while ago. So, now I've built up a portfolio of 12 properties. So I do mostly furnished rentals, so short and medium term.
Gotcha. So what gave you the idea to do it in the first place?
Yeah, so that friend that I talked about, he was living in New York City, and it was 2011, and he first told me about it when he was going to just kind of take a leave. He got laid off from his job, and he was like, I'm super burnt out, but I had this super expensive New York City apartment, and I heard about this Airbnb thing. I think I'm just going to try it. And what was going to be, a month or two away turned into an entire year. And after that year, he made $50,000 off of this apartment that he didn't own. And so he was raving about this thing that I had to try.
Holy crap, that sounds awesome. Okay, so how did it end up working for you at the start? Was it smooth immediately, or was it a tough go? Do you kind of remember?
No, I do remember. Yeah, so, I started in August. I had no idea seasonality or anything like that. Plus, my friend was doing it in New York City, where, I mean, in the cities, everybody knows about stuff when it comes out. And so it does well. You've got more people. And so I was doing it in Boulder, Colorado, which, first off, we were kind of going into the slow season, seasonality wise, which I didn't know. And then second, it's a smaller town. So it takes a while for something new like Airbnb to show up. And so for me, it was just enough. It was very slow and steady where it was like I was still living, like it was paying more than my roommate was essentially. So for me, it was awesome. Right. But it wasn't one of these things where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to retire. This is amazing. I didn't realize that potential of what it could be for a little while longer.
Gotcha. Can you give us a rough breakdown of like the numbers if you don't mind? Like, do you remember how much your rent was and how much you were making?
Roughly. So I think my rent was 1,200 or 1,250 for a two-bedroom, which is so cheap compared to now. And then I think my roommate was paying somewhere like 700, something like that. And so with Airbnb, I was doing a little bit more than that, right? So at first I was just like covering that, and then it was like 900, and then it was over the more, or not the mortgage, but the rent. And so that was really cool to see, like, oh wow, just by, cleaning the room and maintaining it, I could live for free. So that kind of made me go like, oh wow, I really should get another place, figure out how to do that. And that was a really big step. That was hard to branch out and do.
That's awesome. That kind of reminds me of the very first time I kind of tried anything like that. I didn't use an app or anything like that, but I just remember being a renter in Florida with another couple. It was myself, my girlfriend in one room, and then we had like this shared office space, and then there was a third room where the other couple, they had this big master, and they were paying half the rent. And I remember our rent was like $1,100, which was a lot at the time. This was like 12 years ago. And one night, my ex girlfriend and ex wife now, she got in an argument with this other roommate, and they left the house the next day. And we were just like, "Oh crap! We have this $1,100 mortgage, which we can't afford on our own." And we are just thinking, "Man, can we get another couple to pay the other half?" And then I don't remember where I read, but I'm just like, oh, maybe I can rent out both rooms and we take the master. And I did that, and we ended up paying less than what we were before. And we had this big master bedroom. I think we were paying like $300, and we rented each room out for the rest. I can't remember the exact numbers. I just remember all of a sudden we were paying half of what we were normally paying, and we got the master bedroom. But you don't have to be an owner. You can still be a renter to kind of play the system. So I think that's awesome.
I mean, it depends where you live now because there's so many more regulations. Back then, there was nothing. It was just like the Wild West.
So yeah, you got your start in Airbnb arbitrage, and that's just like a crazy cool way. Because again, just like Nick was saying, like you don't have to be an owner to invest in real estate. You can take advantage of everything just by being a renter, and that's a fantastic way to just get in. Speaking of getting, what was your next step after that?
Yeah, so after that, I had to get another place. So, what I was noticing is that her room was booked up consistently. Then I started renting my room out and I had no place to be. So, I was like, oh, I need another place. And sometimes I'd stay with friends or I'd pet sit or something, but it just like wasn't a long-term solution. So, I borrowed $4,000, which sounds like no money now, but I borrowed $4,000 from my dad, and that was first month's rent and deposit on another two-bedroom apartment, and then a little bit of furniture. I have no idea how I furnished the place for so cheap. Anyway, but yeah, that worked out. And then I had a second place. And so for like the next 2 years, I went between two places and just stayed wherever wasn't booked.
That's so cool. That's just wow.
Living out of a suitcase is not easy, but what was really cool is that it allowed me to not have to work at a job and to get to a place where I was pretty close to financial independence. And so that is cool.
Yeah, that's absolutely what I meant by cool for sure. Like, I mean, living out of a suitcase sounds rough, but you did it and you figured out a way to make it work. And that is the cool part of this, right? So it's good on you. That's so cool.
Well, it was a perfect time in my life because I was like late 20s. And at that point, it's like I could do that. I was super flexible. Like it was fine to be a little bit of uncomfortable. I think now it would be harder to do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of us go through that, and I just think it's cool that you're able to go through all that because then you just kind of learn how to be creative right from the start, and you don't get stuck in this trap of just like being a long-term renter or a long-term home buyer, and never really having the opportunity to just kind of see what people would actually rent rooms for, and then you can go from place to place and just kind of pick up the habit.
So yeah, you got a couple properties under your belt. You started getting some momentum. What were you doing after that? Were you just continuing doing that, doing the Airbnb arbitrage?
Well, I knew that I really wanted to buy. And I think a lot of people use arbitrage and that's just their end strategy. For me, because I didn't own the properties and because it was sort of like under the radar, it felt really unstable. And I was like, wow, I don't want somebody to be able to just take this away from me and literally just say, like, hey, I've decided to sell the property and now you're out of luck, like as a renter, you just don't have the control. And so I saved up, I bought a place, and that was a huge turning point. That's when I actually was financially independent from just one rental and one owned place, because just the numbers are a little bit better usually when you own it. Right. So that worked out really well. And then I pivoted into co hosting. So there's a lot of different strategies you can do if you're doing short term rentals. And a lot of people want to go directly to arbitrage, but arbitrage is actually more risky. And the reason is you have to pay for the furniture, you have to put the down payment, and then if it doesn't work, it's all on you. If you co host, you pay for nothing. Really, you get in $0. They have to have it furnished. It's somebody else's house. They're covering all that. And then you make money from the very first booking, right? Because you're taking a percentage. So even if they don't cover all their expenses, you still made some money. So, I mean, I think you want to help people find a place that's going to be super successful, but the risk is not there. And so that was something that was really great to get into.
So I've never done any co-hosting or anything like that. Can you kind of break down what that actually is just a little bit?
Yeah, so essentially it's just managing a property for someone else. And that can be a property that's full time and it can be a property that's part time. So maybe it's somebody's cabin that they don't use that much in certain seasons. Or what I did is I found a lot of different business travelers where they were gone maybe 2 weeks a month, and I was helping them rent out their places while they were gone. Because in Boulder, they have to be owner occupied. So it was just kind of like a rule that we had as the years came on. We got some regulations.
So Z Money, something that you mentioned prior to co-hosting that we kind of glossed over, but you mentioned that as a renter though you don't have as much control, and being a landlord, at any point you can pretty much somebody can sell the property from underneath you, and this is something I don't know if enough people really understand this being renters, because I've been a real estate agent for 12 years now. And I've seen a lot of owners that have rental properties that will just sell pretty much at any time. And then all of a sudden, the renters who thought they had this cool thing in place or this low rent, or they're happy because they're on a month-to-month contract, at any time they could be told, you got to go. And that can really throw off somebody's life balance. Being a real estate agent, I've seen it happen so many times, and it's such a risky position, I believe, to be a renter, to get all stabilized and feel like you really have a home. But at any point, if you're not in a lease, the owner can decide to sell, or they can decide, hey, I have family moving here. We want to use the house for something else, or we want to use it as an Airbnb, yada, yada, yada. But you got to be so careful being a renter, just knowing that at any point you might have to pack your bags.
There's an illusion of the cheap rent, right? So people are like, oh, I have this deal. It's going to be great. So that can dry up at any point. Like you're saying, somebody can take that away from you. But the other thing about cheap rent is you don't build any equity. And so as the world gets more expensive, even if your rent is a little bit cheaper than the average, without that equity, you come out the other side without like anything to really show for, retirement or extra things like that. So I just think it's super dangerous. I've definitely seen people where they make just enough to kind of cover their bases into their 30s and 40s and then come out the other side realizing like, oh God, I didn't prepare myself. And wealth is built over time, right? So equity is a slow game, but so is investing in the stock market or putting stuff away for retirement. So if you start at 40, it's so much harder than if you started in your 20s.
Yeah, you can't rely on cheap rent to be there forever. I mean, cheap rent is like being an elderly person in hospice care. Eventually, the contract is going to be terminated.
That was an interesting
Yeah, that was
example.
interesting. Okay.
Okay.
Here we go with that then.
Morbid
The
Nick.
reason I bring this, well, I mean, just because I've seen it happen a lot. Cheap rent doesn't last forever, and it usually results not just in the rent being spiked up, but you being asked to move out so that they can clear that, clean up the property and reuse it. So anyway, we can move on. Sorry.
No, no, morbid Nick in the house. I love it. So, yeah, moving on just a little bit though. So, obviously, doing all that. When did you start taking your dive into medium-term rentals? Like, what property did you get where you started thinking this is a good strategy for me?
Yeah, it wasn't really the property, it was just the timing. And so I had been doing short term rentals since 2011. I naturally had some guests that stayed over a month, but I never really thought about it. I didn't think to pursue that. I never really had to, I guess. With COVID, though, things changed a lot. So it was early March 2020. All of the bookings canceled from like one night to the next. It was just kind of like when the US was really taking hold of quarantine and people were realizing, like, I probably can't take these trips. And so it was all of a sudden that like about 2 months of bookings just kind of evaporated and nobody really knew how long this would last. And so I knew, well, I'm not going to let my places be completely vacant. I've got to figure out another way. And I had done some managing of a long-term rental for a friend in town. And so it was kind of like, okay, maybe I just, find some long-term tenants and I've just got to figure out a way to show the properties because these ones were states away from where I lived. But luckily, what started to happen is that as people were coming back, they were quarantining for longer stays. Then people were needing bigger spaces because they were working from home and their kids were at home. Then people were coming in to do relief work. And so I was housing people that were like government workers and nurses and doing emergency care. And so I started to realize, wow, okay, I think there's something to this. I could still keep these units furnished and I can find these people that are still booking kind of sight unseen. And I think it's going to be a thing. So yeah, I mean, it was a little bit rough. I won't lie about
A lot
that.
of trial and error.
Um, yeah, a little bit of trial and error, but then it picked up and it really has been a great thing. And it's continuing to evolve a lot. I think it's a really young strategy.
Nice. So what are the main strategies that you're using to get these medium-term bookings?
Yeah, so I mean, the easiest thing for someone to start with is Airbnb and Furnished Finder. So Furnished Finder is a website where is primarily geared towards medical traveling professionals, like traveling nurses. But now it's gotten more and more popular. So I'll see a lot of people that are maybe like slow traveling, where they're digital nomads and they just kind of go from place to place. They're using Furnished Finder. I see students there, relocations. So there's kind of a lot of people coming to that platform. But I would say that it depends on the size of your property, because if you've got a 1 or 2 bedroom, that's going to be great for nurses. If you have a 4 or 5 bedroom, it's a different kind of traveler. You're going to be gearing more towards families. And so you may not find them as readily on Furnished Finder. So you kind of have to take what you have asset wise and then decide from there.
So other than just listing your property on Furnish Finders or Airbnb, are there any other measures that you take to ensure that you're going to get your properties booked? Like, do you try to get a hold of like the chief of staff of the nurse association or anything crazy like that to try to get in with anybody, or an insurance agent, or not insurance agents, but like an agency that deals with relocating families? Do you go that extra step other than just posting your properties to ensure that you're getting bookings?
Yeah, so that's a way that Jesse Vasquez teaches. So he's another person in the mid to rental space, and he is very big into cold calling, and I don't think it's necessary. So that is a way to do it, but you can also list your property on a bunch of websites. So if you're going that insurance company route where you're trying to work with displaced tenants from like fire, natural disaster, flood, something like that, there are probably, I think we list on about 8 websites for those, but those are generally bigger houses, right? So you want a single family home, ideally, you know, 3 bedrooms plus, but really 4 or 5 bedrooms are better. You'll have less competition as you get into those bigger spaces. But with that, you can build relationships once those agents reach out to you, but you don't need to just pick up the phone and randomly cold call, because that's a lot of wasted time. I mean, it might add up to something, but most chances it doesn't.
I'm just curious because, like, I know our local market here in North Idaho in the Coeur d'Alene area, there was a lot of people trying to get creative the last year and a half or so as prices have skyrocketed, interest rates skyrocketed, and the rents just actually did not catch up with what a property, what somebody could get a discounted property for and still refinance it with a 7 or 8% interest rate. And they still can't get enough rent to cash flow, so they're resorting to Airbnb, Furnished Finder, medium term rentals, that kind of stuff. But I feel like in our local area, there's still such an abundance of inventory. Even those people are having a hard time trying to get bookings, and they're just sitting on vacant homes throughout the winter. So that was the purpose for my question. But obviously, in the markets that you're invested in, maybe you know your markets better, and you don't have that abundance of inventory, right?
This is the first year. So I've been doing this about 10 years. This is the first winter that I saw a little bit of what you're talking about, where you actually had to try. So it sounds weird, but before you didn't. It's like you could just have it on Airbnb and Furnish Finder and it was nothing. This winter, I was surprised, and maybe I dropped the ball a little because my assistant kind of handles all of my rentals, but I noticed a little vacancy and I was like, whoa, wait, where are we? What's happening here? And that was when we started listing on more websites where, occasionally we'll go into Facebook groups and they have the traveling nurse groups and you can kind of post your properties in there. If you make a little more effort though, I was finding that we were able to fill them. And now already we're kind of coming into spring, I'm noticing a lot more traction, but I'm not exactly sure what happened. I don't know, honestly, if our book kind of messed some of that up. Maybe brought too many people to the strategy. I mean, maybe. But also, I think 2021 was just the year of short-term rentals. They did better than they ever had done. And I think it brought a lot of people into the space. And then they realized, oh, it's actually a bit harder than we thought. And so there was a lot of inventory just kind of sitting around. So I'm hoping some of those people have left or pivoted. I'm not quite sure what's happening now.
Yeah, which I'm sure. I mean, those I know firsthand. I jumped into four, short-term type of rentals at late last year, and two of them I sold, just because it just wasn't working out. Not the way that the predictions kind of guided, and there's just too much equity trapped. And also, but while I was making all these renovations, the interest rates were skyrocketing. So the mortgage was not what I anticipated at all. I'm one of those people that, less competition. I jumped out of half of them. So I think you will definitely see that for sure.
I think a lot of people definitely got a kind of over leveraged this last year as far as what they can and can't do with investing. And you're going to see a lot of people jumping out of the business, but you're going to see a lot of people kind of doubling down. So it's might be a wash at that point. Who knows? But I want to go back just to medium-term rentals just a little bit, Ziana. In your opinion, what do you think makes that such a viable strategy for you?
Yeah, I think for me personally is that I've been in this game for like 10 years. And so as you go through, I think there's a point of getting comfortable and maybe a little lazier. I think at the beginning a lot of people are really trying to like maximize every dollar because you have a certain goal or you're trying to replace an income or something like that. And for me now, ease is much more important. And so I would rather have a small portfolio that I think is performing huge, where you're getting like really great returns. Otherwise, I don't really want to do that. It's like I'm not trying to have 100 doors or, make a lot of hardship for myself. I want to enjoy my life. So that's why I like it more is the ease, but I think it's different for everybody.
So this is something that my wife and we actually thought about doing medium-term rentals as well. We haven't pulled the trigger on it, but we are on furnished finders, kind of looking around, putting our lure out there, so to say. But it's hard to get, and this is out of our primary home at the same time too. So the strategy's a little bit different. Getting a comfortable tenant in our house, basically. Do you have any advice on that?
So, I mean, is it a bedroom in your house or is it like a basement separate?
It's a bedroom, so we have two bedrooms that are vacant right now.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I haven't had somebody live in my house in a long time, but that's how I started. And I actually loved it because to me, it almost felt magical. Like it was like just the right person that I needed to meet to learn something, or like I just had all these great adventures listening to people traveling. I don't know. I loved it. I think it's just about screening well, right? It's like get on the phone with them and see if you have commonalities and see that it's somebody that, even just times of day work well. Like, are they night workers and it's going to wake you up all the time? Like, I don't know. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question for you, but good screening, having good questions.
Yeah, good enough for me. I think I just need to actually double down on your book. I started reading it. I was trying to get it done by the beginning of this podcast. I failed my task, unfortunately. But nonetheless, I do want to talk about your book. So we got The 30-Day Stay Here by Zeona McIntyre and Sarah Weaver. This one is signed by you, not by Sarah. I couldn't find Sarah at BPCon, unfortunately. So it's I got half the book. How was the book writing process for you? And do you have any plans on writing any more books?
Um, I kind of want to, and I go back and forth. I feel like it was tricky because, I don't want to think that selling 10,000 books means that that's how many people are now in this space. Like, why would that little bit affect all of our rentals? But there is a part of me that's like, shit, if I write more books, is it going to be harder just to do what I'm doing every day? Like, I don't necessarily want to bring that, but it is such a cool process. I think I always wanted to write a book. And so to actually have one and have people reading it, it's so surreal. The actual writing is, I don't know, it's like a personal growth journey. I noticed that some days it would be like super smooth and I'm in the zone and it's flow and it's great. And then there would be other days where I hated everything. I couldn't get the words right. I had so much doubt. Who's going to read this? Is it good enough? Do I have a big enough portfolio for this? All of that kind of stuff. And so I'm grateful because I do think it's helped a lot of people. But yeah, it's no joke. Writing is.
It is. Even like I just write content for my own like Instagram and YouTube and everything like that. It's hard writing content, and these are just like 30, 60, 90-second clips. And I have to write it all out. I'm like, do I sound stupid when I'm writing this? I say the whole thing out when I'm writing it, and it's a whole process for sure. So I commend you on writing an actual book. It is a super really cool achievement. So
It's not hard for me to write books.
okay, Mr. Chat GPT.
Oh no, I know that's so sad. I wonder how many books are going to be actually penned by people anymore. It's
Yeah,
hard
Nick,
to
why don't you
say.
tell us how many books are going to be penned by people?
Well, I don't know. So I just recently, a couple of weeks ago, I started a series of 12 different books, and I am not a writer by any means. But I sure do like having the assistant there that I can keep critiquing their work. And so, no, add this, more humor, blah, blah, blah. I think AI is amazing for helping with content creation. And I don't think it's all, I think people had the wrong idea about it too. So this is where I'm going to I'm going to play devil's advocate, but you can just say, hey, write a book about this. And it's going to be bland and generic, and it's going to be what it is. But I think you could still put your own touch on it if you're reading through it and say, no, use this, or use this as the name. And no, talk more in depth about this subject instead. Okay, really key in, take that out. It's a really handy writing tool. There's going to be people that will just use it to write for them completely. But it could also just be used as a really great tool of like there's somebody standing there next to you and you're just spitting your ideas at them as they're typing it up because they're better at making commas where they need to be,
Great. Yeah. I think it's great. It's just an evolution.
It's an evolution of making things easier.
Well, for the record, we didn't have that back then.
No, no, no. You put in the hard work and the blood, sweat, and tears into your book for sure. So
Yeah. I mean, I still think there's hard work there. I don't want to take that away from Nick, but yeah, it was really cool to share our personal stories and experiences and stuff. We tried to make it more engaging that way.
and that's good. I think you made a great thing. Obviously, you host meetups in Colorado too. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And are they all based around the short term or the medium term rental strategy as well, or do you guys have different speakers come to your events?
Yeah, it's in like an evolution right now. So our group is called Airbnb Investing. So you would think that it's mostly short and midterm. We have had different kinds of speakers come. Some people like Section 8, which I think is super interesting, especially on the heels of a recession or something. But I think sometimes having a speaker takes away from like the meat of the meetup, which is really just getting to know each other. So we're kind of playing around with if we want it to be mostly networking, occasional speakers, or what we're kind of doing with that.
Ziana, let's go back to something if you don't mind. For the listeners out there that don't know how you guys start, how did you get in relationship with like BiggerPockets, and how were you able to get them to publish your book? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so 2017 was the first time I was on the BP podcast, and that was back when I started writing a blog. And I live in Colorado, so I'm close to the BP headquarters, and there's also like just a big group of financially independent people. There's kind of like enthusiasts around here. So if you guys are familiar with Mr. Money Mustache, that was a really big blog at the time too. And so kind of hanging out with those sorts of people. And one of those people that lives near him is Mindy Jensen, who is one of the podcast hosts at BP. So we became friends, and I just pestered her until I was on the show. There are ways to just apply to the shows if you want. But yeah, I kind of got in that way. And then my show was a real big success. And so they offered me a book. I guess they kind of offered me to put in a proposal for a book way back in 2018, and I flopped that. I just didn't take it very seriously. And so around maybe 2020, when Avery Carl's book came out, which was short-term rentals, I realized like, oh shit, I really messed up that opportunity. I should have done it. And so after that, it had really been on my mind, and I was like, you know what? I really want to write a book, but I'm not quite sure. And at the 2021 BP Con, I was there and I was looking at all their books, and I thought, I wonder if medium-term rental is too like niche, or if that would be interesting. So yeah, I ended up pitching it right after that conference. Yeah, and then brought Sarah on. She was my roommate at the time at the conference. So it kind of was just all random synergy at that time.
It all happened the way it needed to go for sure. So yeah, you guys ended up writing a book together. How cool is that? You just met up with a person at BPCon and you've got a co-author for your book. That's great.
Yeah, it really came together so well. And BP was really unsure about it. They did a lot of like testing and keywords, and they were like, nobody's talking about this. But they took a chance on us, and then it kind of blew up right around the time we were launching. So really good timing for us.
That's awesome. Yeah. Perfect timing. So it was probably good that you delayed your book writing until a couple years later.
Yeah, I know. I think sometimes it's easy to think like, oh, I should have done this, or, I missed this opportunity, but then something even better comes along. So I'm trying to really trust in the timing.
I love it. And your book has only been out for roughly about 6 months. Is that correct?
Yeah, it came out in November.
November, okay. I think, yeah, because I was at BPCon last year and I got the advanced copy of it because it wasn't actually out yet. I was like, ooh, juicy. I get free things or things before they actually hit the market. So that was really cool. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, writing a book, I'm sure that's been great for you. So what's your plan going forward, by the way? I know you want to do kind of a small but mighty portfolio. You got 12 houses right now, which again isn't really small. You're financially free. You're doing a lot of really cool things. But what's your plans in the future to kind of go forward with that?
Yeah, I'm really testing out this insurance strategy of trying to get homes that work well for that. I think the hard thing for me out of the gate is that most of my properties are not a good fit. So they're either condos or they're very small homes, like 1 or 2 bedrooms. So I've had to buy new inventory and sort of change it around to test that out. So I think right now I'm really excited about this. It feels new and meaty, and I'm learning a lot. But if I don't love that, I'm just going to put all my money in syndications and say, like, I'm done. So I'm just kind of seeing.
Get your returns and be like, all right, we're good, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think something that I want to just mention to people is that short and midterm rentals, they're sexy, it's interesting, I get it, but like if you're not an operator, don't feel like you have to. There's so many syndications out there with like incredible operators that are doing like hotel projects or different kinds of short-term rentals. Like there's many ways to make 20% cash on cash return. You don't have to be an operator. So I just want people to know that.
And with syndications too, do you still get the tax benefits and everything of owning real estate? Is that correct?
Yeah, it depends on how they structure it, but I would definitely make sure to invest in one that does cost segregation.
So what are some of your favorite markets that you're investing in right now?
I'm really focused in Atlanta right now. I think that on top of just being a big metro with lots of Fortune 500 companies coming in, a lot of people moving that direction, There's also the film industry that they are big with midterms because the films can be like 3-month projects. A lot of people coming in for those projects. And then they've got universities and hospitals and a lot of different things. So I'm kind of playing with that market right now. I think there's a lot of potential. Worst case scenario, I do think it's appreciating. So it's a lot of playing. It's a lot of experimenting. I think people think I just know it all, and I'm like, nah, I'm making it up as I go.
So with Atlanta, I know Atlanta's a very big place. Do you have any recommendations on what's been working well so far? Like northern Atlanta, east, west, southern Atlanta? Are you within an hour from the city or closer?
I'm just outside of the city limits, and the reason being is like I wanted to be able to do short-term rental legally, and you can't do it inside of the city limits. And I like to have the ability to fill in my gaps with short-term rental, but still prioritize midterm.
Nice. That gives you a nice little strategy, so you always have business coming in one way or another. So
Can you give us a rough idea? Sorry, I want to talk more
yeah,
about
no,
Georgia. What's roughly, and I know prices are probably all over the place, all over the country, but roughly, what are you looking for in, let's say, in a Atlanta house or just outside? Are you looking for a single family and at a certain price point, certain square footage? Can you give us a rough idea what your ideal place is like?
Yeah, so the last place we bought was a 4-bedroom, 4-bath. I don't think you need to have as many bathrooms per bedroom, but it does really help. I want to have larger homes, so I like the idea of 5, 6 bedrooms, but 4 is what we kind of found to start. I don't think I would reach out and buy a 3-bedroom, but if you already have it and you want to convert it, cool. Then from there, I like around 2,000 square feet because I want it to feel spacious. A lot of times these older homes, it says 4 bedrooms, but it's like 1,400 square feet, and you're like, how big are these bedrooms? Like where are you gonna be? So I try to be cautious about that. I think when people are investing out of state, it's easy to sort of miss those things, and then you show up to your property and go like, oh gosh, everything's so small. Um, what else feels important? I think a half acre is nice if you've got a little more space to your property that gives you space away from other people, especially if you're doing short-term rentals. You just don't want people kind of bothering you. I stick away from HOAs. I have midterm rentals that are great, that are condos. I'm not like anti HOA, but if I'm going to do a house, I'd rather not. Yeah, so that's sort of what I'm doing. I'm in East Atlanta right now. The price point we're at, we bought something at 380. I think I may be open to spending a little bit more money and maybe getting a new build or something like that, like an infill lot, not something that's in like a brand new neighborhood. But yeah, I like new builds. I like low maintenance. That's kind of something, again, ease. Ease is like the headline. That's all I'm looking for.
What are some of the expenses that maybe some newer investors, if they wanted to copy what you're doing, might run into that they probably wouldn't expect, like landscaping? Are you paying the cable bill, that kind of stuff? Can you give us just a rough idea what kind of things might catch people off guard that they should be aware of?
We pay all the utilities. So I don't have cable. We just give them streaming services like Netflix. So Wi-Fi is important. But if you got a house, there's a lot of utilities. I don't know if people realize that. I think when I first bought a house, I was living in a condo and I was just like, oh, it's not a big deal. And then I was like, man, what's all this like sewer, water, trash, electricity, gas? It's like, it's so many bills. So prepare yourself for that. Get quotes ahead so you know what you're expecting. And then furnishing. I think furnishing can be a lot more expensive than people realize. Our last project was over 20,000 to do a big house like that. So the thing that we use that's a really nice secret, or maybe it's not a secret, but we didn't do it in the past, is using 0% cards. So if you get a credit card, it's 0% for maybe 18 months. Then you can space out those payments, let your house make some money first, and then pay it off.
Yeah, something that I learned kind of the hard way back, and this was before Airbnb got like super popular. But I remember I bought this cabin, and I could have rented it for like 800 to $1,000 a month, long term. But I decided to do an Airbnb, and it did really well. I was making a little over, I think, around $2,000 a month or so. But some of the things I didn't really figure in is like power, water, sewer, cable, internet. landscaping, all this stuff you can't really just push onto a short-term rental tenant like you could a long-term tenant. And then you figure vacation management fees. There's 25% off the top of there, and then another few $100s in utilities, and you're back to, maybe if you're lucky and you're almost always booked, you're making about the same amount of money as you would if you just had a long-term tenant and you never had to give the property any attention. So I would really highly encourage people out there to really dive deep into the numbers before they jump into a medium or short-term rental investment, and see how it compares, including utilities and landscaping and management costs, how it compares, because it may not be that far off when you're looking at the bottom line.
It's true. Yeah. I don't find it as much with the midterm rentals, but short-term rentals for sure, because you've got so many expenses coming up all the time. Lots of cleaning, lots of turnover, lots of replacing things. So yeah, adds up.
Now, just going back real quick, I know you've said you got 12 properties. How are you financing these properties, by the way, Ziana? I don't know if you're past your 10 bank properties. Like, what are you doing for the other ones?
Yeah, well, apparently you haven't gotten to that place in our book.
I haven't yet. I'm sorry.
You're fine. I'll
I'm
just give you a
working
hard
on it.
time.
I'm working.
I didn't get a mortgage in my own name until probably my seventh property. So I did a lot with partnerships. I did some private money, that kind of thing. I think partnerships can be great, and I still do partnerships a lot. And when I do a partnership, I've done some with cash, but most of the time it's somebody else getting a mortgage in their name. And I think for me, that was really easy at the start because Airbnb was my job. And at the beginning of Airbnb, people were not recognizing that as income. And so it was not something you could get a loan off of. Now you can, but back then you couldn't. And so I would partner with somebody who has a simple W-2 job and like they can easily get a mortgage. So just trying to be creative in those ways.
Okay. Yeah, it's good to be creative. Absolutely. Have you taken over any mortgages that you've done partnerships with on like subject to or anything like that? Or are you just sticking with kind of the partnership route?
I have not taken over any sub 2 mortgages, but I have sold that way. I wanted to test it out. I was really excited about creative finance, maybe like last year. And so I was like, oh, cool. I want to help people like buy that way. And I want to test it out as a seller because I think sellers are the ones that have the most questions about it. So ours has been fantastic. We got out of a property that we felt like was underperforming, and this other person got in so much cheaper than they could have at market mortgage rate, and they were just really pumped.
So funny enough, you don't really hear this much, talking to investors that sold on subject to, but we just had an investor, Mike DeHaan, last week, tell us about how he sold a few properties subject to, and I'm right now I'm selling two of my properties subject to because I know an investor can see a lot of value in a 4% mortgage right now, and they're willing to pay a premium for the property. So I think that's a strategy. Not a lot of people are talking about when it comes to selling a property, but they talk about it a lot when it comes to buying. But I think it's a really cool strategy to sell as well.
Yeah, well, and for a little while there, because I'm also a real estate agent, I was just seeing homes sitting. Like they're starting to move a little bit more. But I'm like, man, if you want to sell that house, chances are your mortgage is 3% or less, right? So share the love. Like you'll get that house out of there in a second. So yeah, I think there's a lot of advantages right now. The only thing is that you are kind of tied to the people for a few years, depending on how long you want to ride that out.
Yeah, so be careful who you sell to. Make sure that they can make the payments. Fortunately, I'm selling to a guy that's a multimillionaire, so I think he can handle it.
We hope so. Yeah, yeah. Ziana, do you have any favorite properties that you own, or do you have any horror stories that you'd like to share with anything gone completely wrong on a midterm rental?
Interesting. I guess my most recent bad story is I had somebody I put in around COVID time. So I think that was just me maybe feeling like a little bit desperate. And I got this couple in without, I think they came from Craigslist. And so I think like Airbnb feels safer to me than something like Furnished Finder. I even feel like a little bit better about the quality of tenant. Once you start going to things like Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, it's really anonymous. You have no idea. So you need to vet a lot harder. And I think it caught me off guard. And so the couple that I got in there, they said that they were waiting to buy a home and that it would just be a couple of months. And pretty much immediately the woman left her husband, and then she was the one on the lease. And so I'd never even talked to the guy. So that was not good either. And anyway, it was just this real drawn out thing. But by the end of it, the house was pretty trashed, and we had to spend quite a lot to get it refurnished and, redone. They had dogs in the house. They were like peeing indoors. It was just pretty rough. And I just never had that experience before because all of my tenants had been shorter term and really great. So it was a learning experience. But one thing that's great about real estate is that it's very forgiving. And even though that cost is probably $15,000, in that same year, our home appreciated 50. And so I'm like, well, it was okay. It sucks, but
Net 35 is still okay, right? Yeah. Cool. Nick, anything you want to add on that?
No, you explained it well. We can move on to the next topic.
I wasn't sure if I had any other topics or if you wanted to kind of go into the wind down or what you were thinking, Nick, if you wanted to retouch on anything else before we got there.
Yeah, I'm curious, if you don't mind, how did you get started with podcasting, with your show, with Vestify, and how's that playing out?
yeah, so I'm actually done with that show. But we're kind of in this weird launch. Like by the time this comes out, maybe I will have done my last episode. It hasn't aired yet, so I don't know how many people know about it. But essentially, Craig Kurlop, he used to live in Denver, so we'd seen each other in the same circles with like Mindy. I think Mindy even introduced us. So we'd been kind of friends, and he invited me to be a part of the podcast, and it seemed like such a dream. I remember being so excited. And I loved it. I mean, it was such a cool thing to be a part of for so long. But I think what has become clear to me, especially after writing the book, is that I was really spread too thin. I was doing way too many things. And as many people do not know, a podcast is pretty expensive to run if you are paying for editors and all of that. So it was pretty much a money pit for us. And he's going to continue it on. And I think, there's a lot of people that listen to it. So I feel sad to leave them. But I need to be true to like who I am and what I'm offering out in the world. And so if I'm not having freedom and living that lifestyle, then like I'm not practicing what I'm preaching, right? So I think that's really important to be in alignment with that.
That's really cool, though. I mean, I'm great that you were on it, and it's great you had such a great experience. Obviously, there's no hard feelings between you and Craig. I'm sure you guys are.
Oh no, we're
Yeah.
great friends.
Yeah. Craig's a cool guy. You're a cool lady. I'm sure you guys will figure it out. And I'm sure you'll be on as a guest for his shows too, just to kind of touch base with you. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I guessed on a lot of shows, so it's nice to still be in the podcast energy, but I don't know. It's one less thing to do for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with podcasting, it is such a huge time commitment and a commitment, with cost, just like you were saying. But I think you really just got to have some intention behind it. And I think a lot of people, over time, they realize maybe it's just not worth it, or their intentions aren't really getting through to the audience. There are still people out there that don't know I sell real estate, and that this is a platform for me to try to help educate potential clients. And I do want your business. And same with Jeremy. Jeremy does hard money loans. Some people don't realize that. And this is why we do the podcast. It's just a way of a way of marketing and to get potential clients. And I think the best way to do that is just by educating people. I think you really got to have intention with it. And it is a huge expense and time commitment.
it is.
I mean, it
sure.
takes up half our week.
Yeah, it's half the week for sure. But like yesterday,
and we don't even edit it.
Right. I was at the Home and Garden show yesterday, and two people walked up to me. They said, "Hey, I recognize you from the podcast." I'm like, "This is kind of cool." Like, yeah. Got some numbers and talked about hard money for a little bit. So I mean, it ends up coming around if you're intentional, but obviously your intent is to be a free spirit, and I think that's a really cool thing. So.
All right, let's get to the final questions.
We're hitting close to the hour mark. I know I had to dive 5 minutes in because my mic wasn't working. So my time is not the correct time. But Zeona, we're going to head down with our wind down questions, if that's okay with you.
Great.
Perfect. The first one is, what's one business or investing book you recommend every single person read?
Ooh, every single person. That's funny. I don't know if I would plug our book. I mean, I think there's a lot of good stuff there. Yeah, fuck it. I like our book. Read our book. No, the other thing I was going to say, and I say pretty often is I really like never split the difference. And the reason is that book is all about negotiation. And I think that's something that applies in all areas of life. I find that sometimes real estate people get like all into real estate, but it's important to be like a well-rounded person. And so I think that's just a skill that you can use everywhere. Yeah.
I totally agree. I love that book. Okay, but speaking of your book, where's the best place that people can find it, and what's it called again? Remind the audience.
Yes, 30-day stay, and you can get it at biggerpockets.com/30-day stay. If you use code Zeona, you get 10% off. So yeah, go check that out.
Perfect. And we'll have that in the show notes as well.
Next question for you, Ziana. If you were given $30 million gifted to one of your bank accounts, what's the first thing you would spend it on?
I would buy like a dream house for my sister. I just think that's like one of the things that keeps me going now, because there's all these little landmarks of like, oh, I hit my financial independence number. Then what do I do with myself? So it's just one of those things of, we grew up in Maui and it's a very expensive market with very limited supply. And so I'm still at a place where I can't quite help them the way that I would like to. And I think that's one of my motivators.
What advice would you give newer investors looking to get started on their first or second deal?
House hack. That's my favorite way to start. I think like right now with interest rates being high and so much uncertainty and stuff, at least if you live in the house and you're maximizing it, like that's the safest way you can go. And it's such an easy formula if you're just moving every year. And if you start early, it's not going to be so hard to move every year.
Totally agree. Best strategy out there.
Next question for you. How do you define success?
It's a feeling. I think for me, success equals spaciousness. And when I feel like I'm rushing to something, or I don't have enough time, or I wake up with things in my mind and anxiety, I'm like, ooh, I'm doing something wrong. I need to kind of reassess the situation. And I think there's a lot of ways that people compare themselves, especially with social media. It's kind of like the dark side of it. So I try to stay away from that and just use my inner compass.
You seem very well aligned. It's really cool hearing that. Yeah.
It's all fake.
It's all fake. It's just a show.
I'm trying. Not there yet.
Well, hey.
She's trying to say she doesn't want to be on this podcast anymore.
Yeah.
Wrap it up,
Great,
Jeremy.
great.
No. I was trying to compliment her. Jeez.
So I appreciate
I
that.
think it's cool because you've got really good energy and really good intentions, it seems like. Obviously, we're all trying to find some sort of balance in this life, and you're just intentional about doing it. So props to you. I think that's really cool. When you're not investing, what's something you like to do with your free time, Ziana?
Move my body in nature. So surfing, mountain biking, just being outside. I like need that. Yeah.
You live in the right area for it too, so.
I do. It's been a cold winter.
And then last question for you. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, ZeonaMcIntyre.com. Instagram, I'm the most active, so at Zeona McIntyre. Yeah.
Perfect. Easy peasy. Any final closing thoughts from you, Nick?
No, I just want everybody to really soak it in that this is Ziana's last appearance on any podcast ever. So you better go buy those books, listen to this again. And thanks for listening, everybody.
No, Ziana, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be in touch and we'll see you soon. So
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you so much for checking out the Investor Shed podcast. If you enjoyed your time, make sure to leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow along on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at The Investor Shed for shorts and promos about each episode. Do you want to be a guest or know someone who has great real estate investing advice and stories? Reach out to us at theinvestorshed@gmail.com.